If that makes it into the podcast, I don't know what kind of show we're running, but
Education and resources to the trans community. Hello and welcome to Transgender Zone.
if this makes it in the podcast, I'll be excited. I had a Wagyu burger with like Japanese barbecue sauce and like the at a local place around here. And if anybody out there likes burgers, we're going to drive down the road and we're going to get it.
Yes,
After this podcast.
that's the plan. I'm going to get the non-Wagyu version just because I can't really tell the difference.
I can tell the difference. But yeah, it's, it's good. If you can't, I'll spend less money for you to enjoy your food. I mean, I don't hate that.
And that's fine with me. And that means that I can get myself a nice dirty martini.
That's true.
That, my friends, is the balance of a relationship with a trans woman.
Is that really what it's about? Or do you just like martinis? I think she just likes martinis.
I think I just like martinis.
Yes. And so today is the relationship podcast. We're probably going to have many relationship podcasts.
I thought you were going to say many relationships. I was like, love to hear more about that.
Yeah, there are. Hey, husband, many? Where's the many coming from? So we're going to be talking about relationships today. And, I want to start out by saying, as a cisgendered man, that I love my wife. I see her very much so as my wife, and I am not gay for being in a relationship with a trans woman. She is a woman first and somebody who has gone through a transgender experience very much so second. And I say that because it is extremely important for people to stand up for their transgender partners.
That's right. A lot of you might actually recognize us from our, I think, like 2 truly specials of My Trans Girlfriend Doesn't Make Me Gay. That is us. We were featured on Snapchat, on Truly's channel, all kinds of stuff.
And that wasn't just out of nowhere. Like, people genuinely have come up to me and be like, oh, so you're dating Victoria. We went to high school together.
Yeah.
So like, if our friends and people in town know us from like local things, not just they don't even know that we're YouTube, whatever. They'll come up to me and be like, oh, so Victoria's trans, so you're gay, right? So are you gay or are you and it's just like
crazy.
This mental leap. It's like, look at her and tell me I'm gay for being in a relationship with you. Cannot say it. You can't say it.
Well,
she's my hot wife. So today we're going to be talking about relationships.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about some of the challenges of the trans community, getting into relationships and all that stuff. Yeah. So I'm really excited to be here. I don't know about
I'm really
you.
excited too. Despite being happily married now to you, the love of my life, it was not always easy. Like, when you transition, you have to understand that it's going to be tough. It's going to be harder than normal to find a loving partner, no matter what you look like. Like, even the most beautiful, gorgeous, passable trans person is also going to have a similar struggle in trying to find someone that loves them. I was even told from people that, even other trans folks, that you're never going to be able to be just a happy married woman with kids in a house. Like, that just doesn't exist for us. And so I was prepared to never have that normal life that I wanted. And that was okay, because it's always worth, living authentically if you have to sacrifice something. Like, I would have lived the rest of my life alone if it meant, like, either do not transition and live a quote unquote normal life, or transition. Like, it's always important to put yourself first. But I never expected to find the love that I have, that I am so lucky to share with Christopher, without getting too sappy.
If you're listening to the TZone podcast, you know that it's going to get a little bit sappy every once in a while.
That's
when
so true.
Victoria and I are on. Yeah.
We're pretty smitten with each other.
Pretty smitten.
Gross.
Pretty smitten. Victoria has, one of the things that can be challenging, but is very reasonably challenging, is that sort of thought can permeate itself into our relationship, where you get anxious about me wanting to be with somebody else, or me wanting to do this or whatever, because sometimes it's even hard for you to kind of convince yourself that, like, everything's cool.
Right. I've been told so much that I wouldn't have the love that I have now that I question it, Like, there are times when I'm like, gosh, would he rather be with a woman that could bear his children, And I mean, he knows I can't get pregnant. He proposed to me.
You can't get pregnant?
Like,
no.
wait, what?
Hold on, what? What?
But you
No,
knew
I
that
know.
going in.
Yeah.
And so like it's an irrational fear and still something that permeates my everyday life.
Absolutely. And I think it's definitely, and this is just a little bit of a tangent here, but it's just every relationship. It's important to have communication.
Right.
And, the whole thing of like, wait, you're getting married and you've never talked about whether or not you want kids and that sort of stuff.
Crazy.
It's like Victoria and I had talked about that from the beginning. And, Victoria and I went to the same high school. And like, we didn't date or anything back then. We barely knew each other. We had like similar friend groups, but never crossed paths. And
Interesting you say similar friend groups. It's,
okay, yeah, I meant that lightly, but I'm gonna get
I was
roasted a
more
little
of
bit here.
the weird kind of artsy kid, and he was in basketball and baseball, and
I was the sports kid.
Sports.
You were in drama club. He was a
But
skater boy. He said, "See you later, boy." So,
good enough for her.
so, yeah, we went to the same high school together, and we know each other well. We know our community well. We know this, but like there are certain things that you need to learn about each other to be in a good relationship. I mean, we were talking really early on about whether or not we want kids. I mean, I think we talked about whether or not we wanted kids before we even said "I love you." Like,
Probably. I mean,
it's
why
so
the hell
important.
are you dating? Like, if you want to if you're dating to have fun, sure. But like, we were both dating to find a partner and like a life partner.
Very much so.
Why is that not like something you just, I don't know. People are crazy.
But
to me. Communication is so key in a relationship.
But it's a rational fear that you have, and I think it's something that basically every transgender woman can identify with, and that like you're not able to. Well, with the technology that we currently have, I know they're trying to make stuff like this, but you can't bear a child, and that's totally fine with me.
Yeah.
And I think that really dives into one of the main points that's going to be on this podcast is that not everybody's going to be cool with it, but you can't sacrifice yourself for a relationship. If I told Victoria that I didn't want her to transition in this way, or that I didn't want her to do this, or that it wasn't okay with me that she was trans or whatever, this relationship just wouldn't have worked.
That's right.
And you're strong enough to stand up for yourself in that way. You would have said it
but
like,
you know what?
okay, I'm gone.
There were times in my life where I wasn't strong enough to stand up for myself, and we'll touch on that later. But yeah, our relationship, for all intents and purposes, is very, very normal. I feel like. What are like any differences, if any?
Yeah.
With our relationship?
I think the main difference, because Victoria's trans in our relationship, is that there's a unique experience that she has that other women that I've dated in the past wouldn't have had.
You've dated other women?
You can't bear kids. So, very unique thing. It's gender dysphoria. And we talked about, if you watched our first podcast, if you haven't, go watch that first podcast. But in the first podcast, we talked about gender dysphoria, and gender dysphoria is something that shows up very differently than like a normal insecurity, right? Like, with other people I've dated, like, hey, I'm insecure about this part of my body or whatever. But with a trans woman, it is very much so like, this doesn't feel like I'm in the right body. Mm-hmm. And that's a very different, it manifests itself very differently. So there'll be a day when like everything seems fine, but she might see herself in a mirror the wrong way and have an idea about like, oh, that I see a masculine feature here, or I see this, even if I think she's gorgeous and I think there's absolutely no way that she should see that. That's why it's, a thing. It's not just like a fad of gender dysphoria. It's like a genuine thing that happens in the mind of trans people. And so I sometimes have to really step in and like try and help with something like that. And I can't solve it, but that's really the only difference. But everybody has insecurities. Everybody has challenges. You just have to learn how to work with somebody differently when they have gender dysphoria, because you saying, I don't think that feature's masculine, or I don't think that doesn't really matter. Like, that's not going to help that person. If you've ever dated a woman, you'll know that sometimes dress shopping can be a little bit hard because it's just not easy. Don't see yourself in a great light, that kind of thing. But it's even more so with this, because once she's in a state of like dysphoric stress, and I don't know if that's the right way, like if a psychologist would say it that way, but a state of dysphoric stress, like we are not going shopping for clothes. We are not going shopping for shoes. We are not bringing up, talking about, or looking at any of her physical features.
Yeah.
We're not talking about her voice. We're going somewhere shopping.
He's whisking me away.
Yeah, we're going to a barcade and we're going to spend some time there. Like,
Yeah.
I think part of it is really just kind of almost like smacking you out of the funk. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Of being like, there's a life outside of you. Like, what you look like is not
Right.
the most important thing right now. And then you kind of
Yeah.
settle into it a little bit better.
I think another difference in dating a trans person, and maybe we'll circle back to this, is that you have to be ready to defend them. And that's not just saying like physically
That's
if you're
right.
out in public, although that's also something to consider. But in conversations with people, that maybe someone will say something about the trans community. And maybe it's not even about your partner in general, but you are now, if you love someone that is a part of a marginalized community, whether that is a trans person, a person of color, a disabled person,
yeah.
whatever, it is your responsibility as an ally and as someone that claims to love that person to stand up for them and to stand up for that community. So that's another layer that I think is a little different.
Absolutely. You are, just by being in a relationship, you have to exude allyship behavior because like it's just going to come up. It's
Right.
just going to come up in life. And I mean, before I got my college degree and all that stuff and kind of moved on to a professional life and like tech and blah, 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 I used to work in construction. And in construction, a lot of the folks there didn't understand what was going on. And so they would say certain things. And you know what's funny is that at one point I was working with somebody that had employed one of Victoria's ex-boyfriends. And they brought up some horrible shit about like, oh, I can't. Yeah, this guy, he's this weird kid that I used to do that used to date this trans. And I'm like, I literally, see, the thing was, I almost didn't say anything because I was like, water off a duck's back, like we said in the last podcast. But I decided to say, I was like, hey, just so you know, like that girl that you just talked about that way is my wife. And I know it is because I know the kid that worked for you. And he was like, oh. And you know what? He didn't talk about trans stuff. He didn't do that. And he got to meet somebody that was like him that was in a relationship with a trans woman. And in some ways, I hope that helped him see that like, oh, maybe it wasn't as weird as I thought it was.
Right. Part of being a trans person that's open, that's not living stealth, or someone that is visibly trans, that extends to the partners of a trans person, is the opportunity, I suppose, slash maybe responsibility, to be educators. Because when I am around, my hometown and I'm in a closed-minded area, like growing up, no one knowingly around me had ever met a trans person.
Yeah.
And so that was a new experience for them. And I was able to, even though maybe I just wanted to enjoy the cookout or enjoy the whatever, like
Many family parties.
yes, like
Many family parties.
I'm gonna take the time to sit down and talk with them about, oh, I went through this and here's how I dealt with that. And because their image of trans folks might be what the media has told them. And there's a lot, some might say hundreds of millions of dollars worth of anti-trans propaganda out there. And
Absolutely.
it gives people the wrong idea of who we are. So when you're a trans person, or if you're a partner of a trans person and these things get brought up, that is another difference when it comes to that.
I agree.
In addition to standing up for women, if you're a husband to a wife, there's that additional layer of standing up for a marginalized community.
Agree. There are many family barbecues where someone would walk up and be, oh my God, Victoria, why didn't you tell me you did YouTube? You didn't tell me you did YouTube. I didn't know you made content. I watched all of your videos
oh my
last
God,
night.
it makes
And
me
some
sick.
of them
I
are
love
like
it.
about like surgeries and certain like very intimate details.
Yeah.
And like, oh, you shouldn't have watched all my videos. I hope you didn't watch all of them.
And what's
Oh
great
my
is
God.
they're all well-meaning, and I don't, especially now where I am in my life, like I'm not offended or uncomfortable with those questions because it's just been so long that I've been answering those things. But there are many times, even with the most well-meaning people, that he will like see me sitting from afar, even at like a bar or whatever, and someone's
I got to go over and save her. I got to save her.
politics about being trans or
Oh my God.
their friends' daughters' nephew is transitioning,
And they just don't know. And I mean,
Right.
granted, it is a privilege that you're able to pass in that way, that you hear that, but it also is just like you then get to hear some of the worst things that people think because they think they're in a safe space to share their bigotry.
and
it's not
that's a
fun.
whole separate thing. I'm saying if someone like knows that I'm trans, they'll come to me and tell me all of their
Oh, God.
experiences. But on the flip
Yeah.
side, and this is a bridge over relationships, but when you pass as a trans person, you start to hear some of the nasty stuff that people say about trans folks. Like I had an
Yeah.
employer once when I was 16, 17, and this was around the time that Caitlyn Jenner was coming out, and there was the whole documentary with Barbara
Yeah.
Diane Sawyer. And my employer was like, "Oh, did you hear about Caitlyn Jenner?" And I mean, y'all know me and my feelings about Caitlyn Jenner. And I was like, "Yeah." And she goes, "Ugh, yeah, I would never let my son cut his dick off." I was like, "Okay, well, I'm gonna
I'm
go wash
talking to
some
the wrong
dishes.
person.
I'm gonna go wash some dishes." I was like,
God,
"Okay."
it's
Crazy.
so bad. And then people ask, like, why didn't you tell us that you do YouTube content about trans people? I'm like, because right now I'm trying to explain to you everything about being transgender at a barbecue I was hoping to just like swim in the pool at.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden I'm the PhD educator. It's, but you know, I think it's important, especially as the husband of a woman of trans experience and therefore an ally, right? And also because I want to be.
Right.
It's important that, you know, we're public about our relationship. And I mean, one of the reasons why I'm on this podcast with Victoria right now is because people need to see normal, functioning adult relationships because they do exist. They just don't get media attention. And so for me to sit here and say, like, I love my wife, I see her as my wife, I mean, it's important to both of us that people get a chance to see that. And it's not necessarily like because we want praise or we want props. It's dangerous to do what we're doing right now.
It is. And I think about young Victoria. I think about young me. And when I would hear, like, you're never going to have a normal relationship, like, I couldn't go online and go find a video of a trans woman getting married. Like, I couldn't go and search up, like, whatever, because that just didn't happen. And if it did, it was certainly not public.
Yeah.
So that's part of why I feel so strongly about sharing our story. And as much as I enjoy keeping our private life private, I do also think about the trans girls or trans women of all ages being able to see that, look, like I did
Yeah.
it, so can you. I made it past
Yeah.
that, and I found someone that sees me as just another girl. I mean, obviously, hopefully he sees me as a little more than just any other girl, but he sees me just as anyone else.
I definitely see her as something more than every other girl. I think that's putting it lightly. So, as you know, we run the website transgenderzone.com.
That's true.
And if you didn't, I don't even know how you got here. But that's okay. Welcome. That's totally fine. So we asked our community, we ask our community very frequently the sort of topics that they want to hear us talk about live. And we had a great comment. Now, granted, it's a sad comment. It's sad that this is the thing that this person's going through, but it's a great comment. And we're going to talk about being in a relationship where somebody might not see you well as a trans person. So one of our community members wrote, I would like to have a good discussion on coming out to a spouse who knows kind of what's going on, but at the same time is kind of rude about trans people. She has no idea what gender dysphoria is. I come out at work and to other people, and they are the most supportive and loving people. That's a hard one.
That's a hard one. I mean, first thing that comes to mind is that in my marriage, in my relationship, Christopher is my safest place. And I can't imagine going to...
It's really sweet.
I can't imagine going to my coworkers and feeling more comfortable telling them my truth than to my spouse. So that's something to keep in mind. But if I were to look at that from an outside view, of course, I don't have all of the information available. I don't know all sides. But to me, that reads as someone that definitely knows that you want to transition. Maybe from what you said, like maybe they've seen you cross dress, or maybe they have an idea that you're, experimenting and stuff. And they're saying that because they want you to know, without being outright and saying it, that they don't want you to transition.
Yeah.
You have to realize that not everyone is going to be okay with it. And not everyone, you can be the ripest, juiciest peach on the market, but not everyone likes peaches.
Whoa. I like peaches.
But oh my God. But seriously, it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. And it comes down to being your most authentic self. Like, you have to put your oxygen mask on before helping others. And if you are not taking care of yourself, if you are not putting your own health and well-being and mental well-being first, then you're not going to be able to show up as a good partner for them.
Absolutely. And I mean, the other thing is that like, okay, what are you doing by not transitioning? What sort of pain and suffering are you putting yourself in by actively not taking the steps that you want, getting the gender affirming care that you need? And you know, that's not, you're also taking a huge sacrifice by doing that.
And I don't want to minimize the experience of being a spouse on either side, and either wanting to transition but also wanting to stay the course and be with your partner, and then also being the partner of someone that married a man, and
Yeah, who
not
went into
wanting
the
to.
relationship thinking you were going to be that gender for the rest of your life.
And I know people that have gone through this, whether they've separated or stayed together and are happily married, or stayed together and are open or something. Like, I am familiar. You're not the only person to experience this. When I think of someone that I love, like, I want them to be happy, even if that doesn't include me. So if
Yeah.
if my partner wanted to transition and I wasn't okay with that, it would take some time. I'm not saying I would just be like, do whatever you want. Of course, it's going to take some time, but I would want them to do what they want to do. Even if I don't want to romantically be with them anymore, I would still want them to be themselves because I love them. And
Absolutely.
I would love them regardless.
Yeah. And I mean, you well know that it's not really a choice to be transgender. It's not like you're eventually
not.
going to forget that you're transgender. So if you hold that back and you don't actually take the steps that you need to take, it is going to destroy you in one way or another.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, I mean, like we've talked about this before, that you knew, I mean, as early as you can remember, you knew.
Yeah.
And so whether you're not had the words to describe it, but it's like, if you're going to spend 10 years or so in a relationship pretending to not be trans for somebody, like, you have to recognize that that's going to be really, really hard on you.
And on them, because you're just going to be miserable the whole time.
Yeah.
And you're be pretending that you're someone that you're not, and it's just an inauthentic relationship. It's horrible. So whether you're not transitioning or detransitioning for somebody else, just, it all has to be in your own hands, and it has to be what you want.
And as long as you think, and to this specific community member, as long as you think you're safe, like, as long as you don't think it's going to be a really dangerous situation for you to come out, it sounds to me like you need to start taking the steps. And if they're not okay with that, then you have to figure out what that life is going to look like.
Yeah.
And it sucks, and it really does. But that's part of that's one of the many hard parts about being a part of or in a relationship with somebody in this community, is that, like, sometimes it can cause problems. Now, Victoria had already fully transitioned by the time that we met, surgical transition, all the different kinds of stuff. But like, so I'm not exactly in their position of that person's partner, but like, if they're not going to be along for the journey, then that's kind of it.
Yeah.
It's a shame. It's a big shame. So I was talking to one of our community members recently about how they got married to, or they were going to get married to somebody, but their family was really not involved, like did not like transgender people. And so they decided to detransition, get into that marriage.
Wow.
And then it ended up breaking up the marriage eventually. And detransitioning is exactly what it sounds like: stopping taking your hormones, stopping doing all of that for the sake of a partner. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I know you have some experience with this, not with me, but in the past.
I do. I once had a partner that told me that he could never love me if I got bottom surgery. And I was totally love bombed. I was 17 and, just so susceptible to just anything. Because,
manipulation, yes. Susceptible to manipulation.
Because I was, again, told that you would never find anyone to love you. And that also leaves you vulnerable to people that know that trans women are told that they're never going to find someone to love them.
I might as well stay with this person, because if no one's ever going to love me and this person loves me, quote unquote, and I think they do, why would I leave?
Absolutely. And so I put off getting surgery for so long because of them. And I regret that so much. Now, I'm happy that everything played out the way that it did, because I had a phenomenal surgery and a great surgeon, and I'm in a wonderful relationship now. And, things worked out the way that they had to work out. But during that time, I mean, I set myself back years. And,
Yeah.
he started to get more and more malicious and calculated when it came to things like that.
Yeah.
And, it got to a point where I looked in the mirror and I didn't even recognize myself. And that is just such a hard thing to go back to. So if you're detransitioning for a partner is tough because you're basing or pausing your transition for a partner, you're basing your relationship on a lie. And that lie is your own identity. Now, something interesting is that not only do people detransition or pause their transition for partners, but some people advance their transition for their partners. So maybe say you're a trans person and you don't want to get bottom surgery, you're perfectly comfortable with what is between your legs, but your partner is like, I really want you to get bottom surgery. Or like, your boyfriend at the time is like, I think you'd look a lot more feminine if you got breast implants and you don't really
Almost
want them.
pressuring a transition step.
Right.
Yeah.
Then that is just as bad, if not worse, than detransitioning for somebody because that's making permanent changes to your body for someone that's not you. And
Yeah. It's a very individual experience.
absolutely. And that's something that has to come first. Like your health has to come before everything else. Changing yourself in any way for a partner is just, it's never the way to success. No one ever looks back on a long, healthy, happy marriage and they're like, God, I'm so glad I lied about myself the entire time. I'm so glad.
I'm so happy I changed everything about myself for this person to love me. No one has ever said that.
I'm so glad that I
one has ever
hid
said
my
that.
truest feelings from my partner.
No, you go to the grave with that kind of stuff, and why?
Yeah.
Right?
Why?
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 Just, on this eyelash, you have a little bit of makeup that started caking on the inside, so you should just take a peek at that because it looks like.
Hello, there we go. Oh, well, that's.
Yeah. You see what I was saying? Oh, that was what that was. Okay. I'm glad I said something then. Real husbands and real friends tell others when their lashes fall off. Just saying.
Okay.
Just saying.
Okay, we're back. Let me go back to my notes here.
We're going to the notes.
Facing adversity, judgment, family, or public. And you might be detransitioning or transitioning or whatever for your partner or your family or their family. Family is a tough one because when you get in a relationship with somebody, you are essentially doubling your family. Like you are subjecting
Very
yourself
much so
to an entirely different set of family values and family dynamics. Maybe your family is incredibly accepting. Like my family is super accepting and loves me. And, it was a battle to become who I am today, but they love me unconditionally. And thankfully, Christopher's family also loves me and accepts me and all these wonderful things. But that wasn't the case with everyone I've been in a relationship with.
Yeah.
And that's certainly not the case for every trans person in the world.
But it's also not the case for every person in my family. Like there are people in my family, certain relatives that decided to say like, I don't want to be a part of your life if you're going to make this decision.
And isn't that so sad? Isn't that so pathetic and weak?
I would use the word disgusting.
Yeah.
Because the idea that you would prioritize your own dogmatic bullshit over one of your family members being in love and actually genuinely loving somebody is so selfish.
Yep.
It's so selfish. And the thing is, though, you would think that because it's such a disgusting behavior, it doesn't happen very often. But most, if not all, trans people have faced one family member from their partner's family or their family that is not okay with what they're doing.
Yes. I've been with someone who was completely written out of the will, and his father stopped talking to him until we broke up because he refused to accept that he was with me. And I mean, that's a recipe for a breakup right there. Like it is. It can put a lot of strain on a relationship and on a person, even if the partner is totally okay with it. Like as a trans person, like them missing their father because of me just ate away at me.
Yeah. And how do you live with yourself doing that? And I mean, listen, it's not like they made a good decision or anything along those lines, but like if that's the case, that's just not easy to stomach.
It's not.
You feel like you're at fault for it, even if you aren't.
At the beginning of this podcast, we were talking about how your responsibility as a partner of a trans person or just an ally of a trans person is to defend them and to stick up for them. And that also can include your family. That makes it harder. You know, it's not that necessarily one random stranger or your coworker said something. It might be your mom. It might be your uncle. You know, it might be someone that you're super close with. And that can be tough, but that is just as, if not more, important for you to stand up for them. Now, if you're the partner of a trans person, another thing you might experience is getting looks in public, whether you're visibly trans or not. As we said in our first episode, if you haven't seen that, please go back and watch that. We'll link it down below. But if you're super tall in public, you're going to get stares. That's just one example that if you are taller in public, people are going to look at you. Whether you're cis or trans, people just look at people. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's malicious, but you have to understand that if you're walking into a restaurant with one of the dolls, you might get a few looks.
Now, I gotta say, I really do. I have a very strong opinion on this.
Okay.
It has taken the entirety of our relationship for me to convince Victoria that they might just be looking at her because she's beautiful and because she's hot and because she has good fashion choice and all the different kinds of stuff. It's taken like at least 6 years for me to convince you that that's the case. And I think that's one thing that, you know, is challenging. And this goes back to like your experience of dysphoria, is that she might not think that someone's looking at her because she's hot. She might think they're looking at me because I'm trans.
Right.
And the only person in that reaction that is thinking about her being trans is her. No, so that can be a hard line to toe. Someone might be looking at you because they think you're cute or because they're just looking at you or because they're just, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that. So there's some training you have to let go of.
Yeah. And I think that's something for both the trans person and the partner to remember, because they might not be used to people looking at them, or people might just not be looking at them more than any other day. But maybe they've never gone out in public with a trans person and they feel a little weird about it and people are looking. They might be like, oh my God, are they looking at us because like I'm with a trans girl? And they're like, oh my God, that is something that you have to be confident in yourself. Chris is a very confident, secure
I am proud of my hot wife. I'm proud of my hot wife. We go places and people look at her and I immediately just assume that they're trying to like size her up and see if like her husband's there. And so I give them that good, don't even think about it stare. And then they move on and then they move on. But yeah, it's important to recognize that there are going to be a little bit of differences, but like they're really not significant. I mean, the majority, I would say like 99.9% of the time that we spend together, Victoria being trans is irrelevant.
Yeah.
And like, because we just live a very normal life. We're watching a show together and she's cooking dinner and I'm playing games and what, like, there's a lot of really normal stuff that happens. Most of it is. And so like, I want to make sure that if anyone's watching this, like, it's not that, ooh, these things come up all the time. They do come up in the same way that other people have problems and things come up for them and whatever. But like the majority of our lives is really normal.
You know, for me, being trans is one part of who I am. And, you know, Chris is diagnosed with ADHD and like,
hell yeah,
things, you know, like certain
very much
things, so. certain times it's more prevalent than others, but it's not like I'm saying I'm in a relationship with someone who has ADHD. Like that happens to be a part of who you are.
Sometimes I interrupt her like I just did right there. I caught it as I did it. Sometimes I interrupt her or I'm not quite listening because I'm thinking about something silly. It's not because I don't want to be listening to her. It's because why am I thinking about that show? You didn't need to say that on the podcast. You really didn't need to say. It's going to stay in the podcast. I know it is, but you didn't need to say that. But yeah, she would never be like, oh, this is my husband. Don't worry, he has ADHD. It'd be like, why the hell did you introduce me like that? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
I mean, if we were on the Karamo show, why do you introduce her as your trans girlfriend?
If y'all saw the Karamo show the thing that we did, he put me in the worst position. And Karamo, if you're watching this, I don't blame you. You definitely had the wrong thing written on your card. Somebody wrote the wrong thing. But oh my God, I get up on stage and I thought we were going to be talking about how Victoria wants FFS and she doesn't see herself as super beautiful in the face and needs surgery to feel better. I walk up on stage and this man looks me in the eyes, man that I've only ever seen on television, and goes, so why do you introduce Victoria as your trans girlfriend? And I'm thinking to myself, not once have I ever done that.
And of course,
we're leaning into this. Yes. We're going to do our best to save this.
We're leaning into it. And Chris looks at me. Neither of us knew he was going to be talking about that. We both thought it was going to be about facial feminization surgery. And so he comes out and Karamo just nails him with that question. Chris looks at me. And of course, I'm looking at him like, why do you introduce me as your trans girl?
I went on that show knowing that my number one goal was to make sure Victoria had a good experience for her career and her YouTube channel. But boy, did I not expect to have to be like under the gun. First time on television. You got to imagine the studio audience. Everyone's cheering. Karamo, a guy you've seen on TV, is sitting next to you painted. Like, it's just the bright lights. Mm-hmm. And then you just get asked like, hey, so this thing that you've never done, explain to me why you've done it. And I said something about like, I think it's important to have representation. Right. I think it's important to know that I love somebody who is this because whatever. But come on, man.
Yeah, for real. That was crazy. Chris is such a good sport listener. He is just always there to, smooth something over. I mean, the fact that he's sitting here now, like Chris decided to focus his career on building TZone and helping with this mission. And that's just one of many examples I have of how much of a supportive partner he is. And I really, truly never thought, I thought that if I were to be able to find a healthy, normal relationship, I would just not talk about being trans ever. And that was okay with me. I
like living stealth in a relationship almost, yeah.
Because like, I don't love talking about being trans all the time either. Like, we're not sitting around like at the end of the day talking about being trans. But we are talking about the trans community every single day because of what we do.
And what resources that they might need and what challenges most people are facing around the country, around the world.
And I feel so comfortable talking with him about those things. And it's taken some time because of my own internalized shame about being trans and everything else, not anything on his end, but it's taken time to get there. But I just never would have thought, 14-year-old me transitioning, looking at 26-year-old me, I wouldn't have ever thought that I would have the life that I have now. And
it's getting sappy.
I know.
It's getting real.
I know.
It's getting real sappy.
But I can't help but say to anyone that's listening that it is possible and it is out there for you. And I understand that I'm coming from a place of privilege, being that I was able to transition young and that I was able to access gender affirming care that some other people might not have access to. But even without those things, it's absolutely possible to have a loving partner and have a normal, healthy, quote unquote, healthy, happy life with a partner.
And I think more and more people like me, I don't want to say I'm totally unique because I'm not. People like me are more and more prevalent now because people are actually getting real education and real information about trans people. It's not just a stigma and a phobia. Now, granted, there's a lot of stigma and a lot of phobia out there and a lot of bigotry, but there's a lot more people that are being raised knowing what someone who's transgender is, even without knowing a person that's transgender. Yeah. And that makes a difference.
Right. And I think generally the two categories of people that you could end up with as a trans woman in particular were either someone that wanted to kind of stifle your transness and didn't want to talk about it and wanted to keep it a secret from their friends and family, or someone who we call a chaser. A chaser is someone that is only interested in you because you're a trans woman, because you are usually a trans woman. This can apply to other trans folks, but usually trans women, and simply because of their anatomy. And often that's anatomy that we're not comfortable with.
And that's the only reason they're there.
Yes, they're there just because they want, they view us as an object.
It's a fetish. I mean, we'll call it what it is. It's a fetish.
Yes, it's a fetish, and you know, while you can have your own opinions on that and your own whatever, you so many of us are told that that's the only option, that you have to end up with either a chaser, someone that wants to keep you a secret, or nothing. And
I got to tell you what, both of those options that we're talking about are so dangerous.
yes,
Because most violence against trans women happens from partners.
yes,
People that either found out afterwards, their friends found out, you know, those people
And
that are scared for people to know. That's bad.
and let's
It's dangerous.
not make any excuse for people that commit violent acts against trans folks, because, and not that you were obviously, but
no excuses.
because the way that people will use the excuse of trans panic, which is an actual thing in like legislature, that if you kill someone that's transgender and you just claim that, oh, I had no idea that they were trans, and then we did stuff and then I found out after.
Yeah.
It's 2024. They know.
It works less
They
now.
know what
Yeah.
you know, they're sniffing around. They know that they're with a trans girl. They're not surprised last minute. These are men most often who know that their partner or whatever is trans, and then their friends find out that they're with a trans girl, and that's when it turns sour. So these are
And
weak.
what a punk
Yep.
move that is.
Yep.
Are you kidding me? I like this person. I like being with this person. Your friends find out and then they start dogging you. And so you kill? So you murder the person?
Happens all the time.
How unbelievably selfish and awful do you have to be to do that? But that's the thing. It's not like, ooh, we're not talking about something that happened on the news well, granted, it probably did happen on the news the other day, but we're not talking about one-off things that happen. I mean, this happens to dozens
Every year.
every year.
In the US, let alone in all other countries around the world.
And never mind places where being trans is even less accepted. It's just the reason why it's so important. And this just all goes back to the reason why it's so important that you and I share our story. And I talk about how I love you, and I will talk about, like, I'm comfortable with people finding out that my wife is trans, because they're not finding out anything, right? They're just learning more about my wife. And like, if you have a problem with that, okay, I don't need you around anymore. I mean, it's really that simple. Like, honestly, it's a blessing sometimes, because I can find out if someone's a bigot almost immediately. If they have a problem with Victoria being trans, it's like, cool, peace. Like, I don't have to deal with you anymore. I will
say, being queer kind of works as its own filtration system, because if you are visibly queer in any way, whether you're a lesbian or a gay man or trans or anything, it acts as an immediate filter, because the horrible people, like bigots, are not going to talk to you. Good. I don't want them to talk to me.
Leave me alone, please.
Yeah, leave me alone, please. Leave me alone.
Yeah, it's just you're so much better off. And I mean, this isn't easy to say, and this isn't easy to hear, and this isn't an easy thing to do. You're better off without the people that don't want you to be trans or don't validate your existence as a trans woman or a trans man. Those people don't deserve to be around you.
Right.
And it is totally okay for you to be confident about saying, okay, goodbye then.
I want to talk, and I would love for you all to comment down below what you think about this. When it comes to dating as a trans person, on the topic of disclosure, how do you all feel about when you should be disclosing that you're trans? So for me, I think, of course, the safest option is right up front. Hey, I'm trans, just so you know, maybe like in your bio or something on a dating app, or right before the first date via text or something, let them know. I think there are 3 prime times that you could tell someone that you're trans. 1 is immediately. 2 is when they ask you on a date after you've been talking. In today's world, typically there's the talking stage first, quote unquote, where you've been texting for a while and they get to know you, and they have a chance to kind of get to know you first. And then you can introduce yourself as being trans before you ever go on a date.
Slightly riskier.
I personally have always preferred that myself, because I saw it as like, I'm trans second, but I'm Victoria first. And I wanted them to know me. And if they just knew that I was trans, then they might not want anything to do with me. And like looking back, I'm like, that's a great indicator of someone to stay away from.
Well, I went to high school with Victoria, and so I already knew, and I was cool with it.
Right.
That was an easy way to know, is he going to be cool with it?
Right. And
I mean,
the third option that I see a lot of people doing, which I don't suggest, is waiting until after the first date. And the issue with that, typically when people wait until after the first date, this implies there's no physical intimacy happening. And that's super important, that even like a kiss, like I think it's important that you tell someone that you're trans before anything sexual happens at all. You know, I think that's very
because
important.
At that point you're
putting yourself in danger. And it's also a matter of consent, you know, on both ends.
That's true, yeah, because they might not be okay with it, and like
right, and they deserve to know. But typically, when people wait until after the first date, it's because they want them to see me first and maybe feel attraction and maybe get to know me and be like, well, despite the fact that they're trans, I'll still pursue this. And the danger in that is of course, physical danger. That goes really without saying. That's why I don't recommend.
Like we just talked about.
Like I don't recommend
people find out.
But also, I think you are just opening yourself up to people that don't deserve your time. If you're worried that someone will be scared off by you being trans, that's not someone that you want to spend your life with. That's not someone, like, you don't want to
couldn't agree more.
Start out a relationship with trying to tell someone why it's okay that you are the way that you are. Like, I think that's insane.
They don't clearly want, like, just let it go then. Like, if they're not not on board, they're not on board. Bye.
And I will say, I've done that many times. Yeah. Like, I've been that person that was like, well, I mean, I'm not like other trans girls, and I think that they should get to know me first because I'm not like those other trans girls. And I think a lot of us have that period of time when we start to pass that we're like, oh, like, I'm not like the other trans girls. I'm like the other. And I really had a moment of humbling really quickly in my transitioning that got me back to my roots and making me realize, hey, I'm always going to be trans and I'm not any better or worse than any other trans girl. But I've been in the position where I've just thought that would be the best course of action. And I wish I could go back in time and shake myself, be like, thank God you're alive. Thank God you're safe. That people knew where you were. Because I put myself in a lot of really dangerous situations.
Stories not to share on the podcast, but dangerous.
Yes.
Like stupid decisions of like, don't put yourself in a situation where you're alone with somebody that doesn't know and then you're telling them like, it's just so dangerous. It really is. Like, the safest thing to do is to say it before, but I understand why you might not. Mm-hmm. You got to at least at some point have a realistic expectation of when you're going to tell somebody.
Yeah. Yep.
Jeez. She was a risky child.
My God, I was a mess. I was a mess. That's a
bad choices.
Another
podcast, or maybe behind a gated content wall, something like that.
Coming soon.
Oh boy! And as we're talking about relationships here, I think one of the important things that we offer through TZone, the subscription service that we run, and the name of this podcast, is there are channels about dating and intimacy. Courses on sex and intimacy, courses on disclosure and that sort of stuff, because, a lot of these topics are really nuanced. And even if you build a course or you listen to a great YouTube video on the topic or you listen to this podcast, like, there's a lot of things to think about and a lot of individualized situations that change the way that you might want to approach it. And so we have a dating and relationship support group channel where if you're going to come out to your family or to your spouse or something along those lines, you can share what you're going through and what your plans are, and you can get feedback from folks in the community. And so, whether it's learning about it on your own on a self-paced curriculum or going into the community and sharing what you have going on and getting support from real trans people, all of that is available through TZone.
Whether you are a trans person, a partner of a trans person, or someone just questioning, thank you, listener, so much for joining us. If you want to see more, please head on over to TransgenderZone.com.
If you're a parent as well, we have a parent-specific membership and a parent chat channel. So kind of regardless of whether or not you are a parent of, you are yourself a trans person, we're happy to have you in the community.
And let us know in the comments down below any questions or stories you have about dating as a trans person, about intimacy as a trans person. Let's try to keep it PG. We can extend it over on TZone.
And if you want to be part of, we talked about some questions that folks asked us. If you want to ask us questions that we might answer on this podcast, join us at TZone. We're always asking for feedback from the community and what's on people's minds, because there's so much knowledge to be gleaned and so many topics to be gleaned from our great community. So thank you so much for watching. This is the TZone podcast, and you can find us on TransgenderZone.com.
Thank you all so much for listening. And until we see you next time, take care of yourself. And we hope to see you in the community.